Death was just the beginning. In ancient times, the greatest terror wasn't the end of life, it was what came after.
Vampires weren't just monsters. They were abominations that defied the natural order, spreading plague, damning souls, and turning loved ones into ravenous predators. They didn't just kill, they corrupted, cursed, and consumed entire communities. While death offered an end, vampirism promised eternal torment. This is why ancient civilizations feared vampires more than death itself. Cover the horrifying truth behind history's most dreaded undead before the night takes hold. Introduction: the shadow beyond the grave. In ancient societies, the pervasive fear of the unknown profoundly shaped human understanding of existence. Lacking modern scientific explanations for phenomena such as disease, famine, or sudden death, these cultures often attributed inexplicable events to the influence of supernatural forces. Within this framework, the concept of monsters emerged as a crucial mechanism, allowing communities to concretize abstract fears, explain natural occurrences, and reinforce social order. Death, as the ultimate and most universal unknown, stood at the epicenter of these deeply ingrained beliefs and anxieties. This video posits that ancient vampiric entities represented a unique and profound threat that transcended the fear of natural death. These creatures embodied spiritual corruption, societal breakdown, and an unending torment far worse than mere cessation of life. Unlike the predictable, ritualized passage of conventional death, ancient vampires introduced an element of active, malevolent perversion that destabilized the very fabric of existence and the afterlife, making them a source of unparalleled dread.
Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Is It Real? Also, I compel you to share your thoughts in the comment box below.
Part 1. The conventional end. Death and afterlife in ancient thought. Ancient civilizations grappled with the inevitability of death, developing intricate belief systems and rituals to navigate this ultimate transition. While often grim, these perspectives provided a structured framework for understanding mortality. Mesopotamian perspectives, a grim underworld, and the importance of proper burial. In ancient Mesopotamia, attitudes towards death were stark and unyielding, often perceived as the consequence of sin. The afterlife, referred to as Kudo-Nujiaya, or the land of no return, offered a bleak prospect for the deceased. Described as a dark realm where souls live in darkness, eat clay, and are clothed like birds with wings. Despite this grim outlook, the Mesopotamian view of death was fundamentally structured. There was a clear process involving the cessation of life, followed by burial and a journey to a known, albeit undesirable, underworld. The spirits of the dead, particularly the Atumu, were greatly feared in Mesopotamian demonology. These entities were believed to return and cause harm if not properly appeased or if their burial rites were neglected. The Akimu, a vengeful soul, could haunt the living, draining their life force and spreading sickness. Consequently, proper burial rituals were paramount, designed to ensure the soul's passage to the netherworld and prevent its return as a malevolent ghost. Offerings were made to propitiate these spirits, born out of a profound fear of the damage they could inflict. This fear, while potent, was rooted in a framework of established practices that offered a degree of containment. The threat was understood, and there were prescribed actions to mitigate it, presenting a known unknown that could be managed through ritual adherence. This contrasts sharply with the uncontainable nature of vampire fear, which defied such established order. Greek and Roman conceptions, bleak Hades, the journey of the soul, and the significance of funerary rites for peaceful rest. The ancient Greeks largely anticipated that the soul, or psyche, would depart the body upon death and continue to exist in some form. However, their underworld Hades was typically portrayed as a bleak and somber place, devoid of life's pleasures for most. Eternal torment was reserved for only the most egregious sinners, such as Sisyphus, while a blissful existence in Elysium was a rare privilege, granted to a select few heroes based on their status rather than their virtue. For both Greeks and Romans, proper burial was deemed essential, its omission considered an insult to human dignity. Greek funerary rituals, including the prothesis, ekphora, and interment, were meticulously observed. Roman beliefs, while sharing similarities with Greek views, also instilled a sense of hope for the worthy, who might find peace in the Isles of the Blessed. Roman funerary practices were often elaborate, designed to immortalize the deceased's memory and legacy through grand processions and eulogies, reflecting a significant societal concern about being forgotten. The concept of restless dead was present in both cultures, particularly for those who died prematurely, violently, or without proper burial rites. These spirits were believed to interfere with the living. However, the fear of an unquiet dead was directly tied to the perceived failure of the living to uphold their societal and religious obligations. If the prescribed rites were performed, the dead were expected to rest peacefully. This indicates that the threat, while real, was rooted in a framework of human agency and responsibility. The ability to influence the fate of the dead through specific actions provided a measure of control over the fear of death itself, a control that was conspicuously absent when confronting the unpredictable and malevolent nature of vampires. Slavic and other traditions, ancestor veneration versus the dangers of the impure. Dead Slavic peoples held complex and often dualistic beliefs regarding the deceased, characterized by a strong adherence to posthumous rites and taboos. They believed that kind-hearted individuals, upon death, joined the ranks of ancestors who protected the living, ensuring prosperity and fertility in exchange for regular commemorations and offerings. This fostered a relationship of veneration and dependence between the living and their ancestors. Conversely, those who died prematurely or violently, or who led dishonorable lives, were believed to become revenant deceased or impure deceased. These entities could inflict harm, sickness, and death upon the living. This dualistic view led to both reverence and profound fear of the dead, underscoring the importance of strictly observing the boundary between the two worlds and placating spirits to avert natural disasters such as hail, droughts, or crop failures. The Slavic perspective demonstrates that the threat posed by the dead was conditional. A good death and the proper performance of rites led to benevolent ancestral spirits. The emergence of the walking dead was a direct consequence of specific circumstances, such as violent death, unabsolved sin, or the neglect of funerary rituals. This meant that the threat, while tangible, was circumscribed and often attributable to past actions or omissions. It was not an inherent indiscriminate malevolence, unlike that embodied by a vampire. It could arise from seemingly random causes or through contagion, presenting an unpredictable and unmanageable form of horror. Part 2. The unnatural horror, defining ancient vampirism. The concept of vampirism, though varying in nomenclature and specific attributes, permeated numerous ancient cultures, consistently representing a profound and active malevolence that surpassed the passive finality of natural death. Diverse manifestations, from blood-drinking demons to reanimated corpses. Long before the term vampire became common, ancient civilizations harbored fears of beings returning from the dead to inflict harm. In Mesopotamia, tales spoke of female demons like Lilichu and Lamishtu, who preyed on the vulnerable, drank the blood of children, and were blamed for stillbirths and inexplicable illnesses. Akimu were vengeful souls, denied proper burial, who would roam the earth, draining life force and spreading sickness. Greek and Roman mythology featured restless dead such as the Lamia and Impuse. Lamia, originally a queen cursed by Hera to devour her own children, transformed into a child-eating monster who seduced men and drained their life force out of jealousy. Impuse were shape-shifting demons with fiery hair that fed on human essence. The Roman Strix was a night demon, or witch that drained infants' blood, described by the poet Ovid as tearing entrails with their beaks. The Greek Rychalakas, often equated with Slavic vampires, was a fearsome undead creature known for feasting on flesh and liver rather than blood, and notably, it gained power the longer it was left undisturbed. Eastern Europe, particularly Slavic regions, is often considered the cradle of vampire lore, with the word vampire itself entering English from Slavic sources in the 18th century. These entities, known by names like Whoppers, Sturzygos, Sturzygo, Wurjalak, and Upir, were not the refined figures of modern fiction. Discolored, discolored, with long nails and animalistic strength. Their primary mode of torment involved drinking blood, eating flesh, or suffocating victims. Romanian. The Romanian strigoi were human spirits who returned from the dead, initially as invisible poltergeists, then becoming visible, stealing livestock, begging for food, and spreading disease. The belief even extended to living vampires who were cursed to become undead upon death. Beyond Europe, Chinese folklore presented the jiangshi, reanimated corpses that hopped rather than walked, seeking vital energy or qi. These stiff, greenish-white beings were believed to form when a person's PO failed to pass into the afterlife due to bad deeds. In India, the Rakshasa were shape-shifting demons with an appetite for human blood and flesh, while Vedala were ghoulish beings inhabiting corpses. Scandinavian Norse mythology featured the Draugr, reanimated corpses that guarded burial sites and treasure, possessing superhuman strength, shape-shifting abilities, and sinister intelligence. Physical and behavioral traits, beyond the pale, the grotesque, and the insatiable hunger, a consistent characteristic across ancient vampire myths, is the consumption of human blood or other vital essence. It's often facilitated by sharp teeth or fangs. Most are depicted as undead, having been revived after death, and typically hunt at night due to sunlight weakening their powers. Unlike the pale, alluring vampires of contemporary fiction, ancient descriptions often emphasized a grotesque appearance. Eastern European vampires were bloated, purple or red from engorging on blood, with long nails and animalistic strength. The Greek Dracula was described as stocky with a ruddy, healthy complexion due to its diet of flesh and blood, a stark contrast to modern portrayals of sickly pallor. Chinese jiangshi were stiff, greenish-white, and lacked the suppleness of the living. These entities possessed supernatural abilities, including superhuman strength and a hypnotic or sensual effect on their victims. Some could even morph into animals like bats or wolves. A frequently cited physical characteristic was their inability to cast a reflection or shadow. The methods by which one could become a vampire were varied and often reflected cultural anxieties. Common causes included being bitten by an existing vampire, sorcery, committing suicide, or even contagion. Superstitions also suggested that a cat jumping over a corpse could lead to vampirism. In Eastern Europe and Greece, excommunication from the church, a sacrilegious life, or burial in unconsecrated ground were significant risk factors. Sudden death or suicide were also cited as pathways to becoming an Chinese folklore linked the jiangshi to bad deeds during life that prevented the PO from passing to the afterlife. More broadly, individuals who were othered by society, such as alcoholics, virgins, heretics, deformed children, prostitutes, or violent criminals, were often considered predisposed to becoming vampires. The detailed descriptions of ancient vampires reveal a profound perversion of both the human form and natural processes. Instead of a dignified rest or a spiritual transition, the body of the deceased became a grotesque, actively malevolent entity. This was not merely about being dead, it was about being wrongly dead, a mockery of life and death itself. The shift from internal decay to external bloat, or from a soul's journey to a body's reanimation,
highlights the deeper horror.
The violation of natural order. This made them more terrifying than death itself, which, while final, was understood as a natural, albeit sorrowful process. Furthermore, the diverse criteria for becoming a vampire, particularly the inclusion of marginalized individuals, reveal a societal mechanism of othering. This suggests that the vampire myths served not only to explain the inexplicable, but also to reinforce social norms and punish perceived deviance. The fear of becoming a vampire was thus intertwined with the fear of becoming an outcast, a monstrous reflection of societal anxieties and moral judgments. This added a layer of social control and psychological terror that extended beyond the simple fear of physical death. Part 3. The Fear Amplified. Why vampires were worse than death. The pervasive dread of ancient vampires stemmed not merely from their capacity to kill, but from their ability to fundamentally pervert the natural order of life and death, inflicting horrors that extended far beyond the physical cessation of existence. Contagion and epidemic. Vampires as harbingers and spreaders of inexplicable diseases, turning natural calamity into malevolent agency in ancient societies, where modern medical understanding was absent. Mysterious deaths and widespread illnesses were frequently attributed to vampires. The vampire became a tangible symbol of disease, offering a terrifying yet comprehensible explanation for otherwise inexplicable calamities. Historical events like the vampire epidemic of the 18th century in Eastern Europe, which coincided with outbreaks of diseases such as pellagra and rabies, illustrate how misinterpretations of decomposition and illness fueled widespread hysteria. Crucially, vampires were not merely seen as consequences of disease, but as active agents that caused and spread diseases and epidemics. This perception transformed an uncontrollable natural disaster into a malevolent, intelligent entity that could be confronted. Natural death, even from disease, is a passive consequence. The fear of vampires, however, is fundamentally about them being the active cause of widespread, inexplicable suffering and death. This shifted the fear from a passive acceptance of mortality to an active, desperate struggle against a malevolent force. The vampire became a personified scapegoat for societal anxieties about disease, allowing communities to externalize and attempt to fight the plague. This made the vampire a more terrifying and immediate threat than death itself, as it embodied the active destruction of life and community rather than merely its end.
Be sure to like, subscribe to Is It Real, and share this video. But if you choose to ignore me, well, let's just say you've been warned.
Spiritual damnation and corruption, the ultimate horror. Victims not merely dying, but becoming undead, losing their souls or facing eternal torment. Slavery, perhaps. The most terrifying aspect of ancient vampirism was the fate of its victims. They did not simply die, but were condemned to become undead themselves, perpetuating the cycle of evil. This transformation implied a profound spiritual damnation or an irreversible loss of the soul, trapping the individual in an unholy, unending existence. In some traditions, the victim's soul was bound to the vampire, or worse, subjected to eternal torment or slavery in a hellish dimension. The idea that an individual's moral nature could be altered and condemned by forces entirely beyond their control was deeply frightening, especially in Christianized Europe, where the salvation of the soul was paramount. Excommunication from the church was frequently cited as a cause for becoming a vampire, further cementing the link between vampirism and spiritual corruption or divine punishment. Conventional death, even if leading to a bleak afterlife, typically allowed for the integrity of the soul and a defined end to suffering. The horror of vampirism lay in its denial of true death and the corruption of the spiritual essence. A person's soul was not merely transported to an undesirable afterlife, but trapped, perverted, and enslaved in an unholy, unending existence. This represented a profound violation of existential peace and the ultimate damnation, a fate far exceeding the fear of physical cessation. Disruption of social and cosmic order, the perversion of life and death, attacking family, community, and defying established rights. Vampires were not indiscriminate predators. They frequently preyed first on their own families and communities, transforming loved ones into monstrous entities. This act shattered familial bonds and eroded the fundamental trust within a community. Their very existence defied the natural cycle of life and death, representing a fundamental breakdown of cosmic order. They were restless dead who refused to remain in their graves, actively disrupting the sacred boundary between the living and the dead. Beyond disease, vampires were blamed for a wide range of misfortunes, including crop failures, the death of livestock, and even natural disasters like hail and drought. This made them agents of widespread chaos and economic ruin. Their presence also undermined the efficacy of traditional funerary rites, which were meticulously designed to ensure a peaceful passage for the deceased and prevent their return. While natural death causes grief and disruption, societies have established rituals to process it and reintegrate the community. Vampires, however, actively prevented this healing and reintegration. They transformed the deceased into a perpetual, active threat, eroding trust within families and communities, and undermining the very rituals meant to maintain order. This made them agents of social breakdown and cosmic anarchy, a fear far more pervasive and destabilizing than individual mortality. Psychological terror, and the other, embodying societal anxieties, moral panic, and the fear of becoming a monstrous perversion of oneself. The vampire served as a powerful symbol and metaphor for the collective fears, distrust, and uncertainty prevalent within societies. They embodied the primal fear of the unknown and unfamiliar. Historical vampire panics frequently coincided with periods of social upheaval, unexplained illnesses, or other societal anxieties, leading to widespread moral panic and hysteria. This allowed for the projection of deep-seated anxieties onto a tangible other. The criteria for becoming a vampire often centered on individuals or groups already othered by society, such as those who died violent deaths, alcoholics, virgins, suicides, heretics, deformed children, prostitutes, or criminals. This reflected latent societal hostilities and anxieties about purity and pollution. The psychological impact extended beyond merely fearing an attack by a monster. It encompassed the terrifying prospect of becoming one, losing one's humanity and identity. This internalized fear, coupled with the othering mechanism, led to widespread paranoia, and even violence among the living, as communities sought to identify and eliminate the perceived source of their woes. This level of psychological and social disruption, where the threat could originate from within the community and corrupt its members, made the vampire a far more insidious and terrifying entity than the simple finality of natural death. Part 4. Desperate measures. Rituals against the undead. The extreme and often violent measures taken against suspected vampires underscore the profound fear they inspired. Contrasting sharply with the reverence typically afforded to the deceased in conventional funerary rites, anti-vampire practices, exhumation, staking, decapitation, burning, and other extreme measures, when confronted with suspected vampirism, communities often resorted to drastic interventions to prevent the undead from rising or continuing their depredations. These measures were far from the respectful mourning associated with natural death. Common methods included exhumation. Bodies of suspected vampires were frequently dug up to examine them for signs of vampirism, such as a lack of decay, a ruddy complexion, fresh blood around the mouth, or the apparent growth of hair and nails. Staking. Driving a wooden stake through the corpse, often through the heart, but sometimes the chest, neck, groin, or ankles, is a prevalent method believed to make sure they stayed dead. Archaeological evidence supports the historical practice of such impalements. Decapitation. Severing the head was another common and definitive measure. In some instances, the severed head's mouth was stuffed with garlic to ensure the vampire's complete incapacitation. Burning. Cremating the entire corpse or specific organs, such as the heart, was considered an effective way to ensure the vampire's destruction. Mutilation. Further mutilations, such as severing tendons at the knees or cutting leg sinews, were performed to prevent the corpse from walking. Preventative burial measures were also employed to deter reanimation. Burying corpses face down was a widespread practice, intended to cause the undead to dig deeper into the earth, rather than rising to the surface. Heavy objects, such as millstones, amphora fragments, or large stones, were placed on the heads or chests of the deceased to physically pin the body in its grave. Various objects were placed within or near the grave. Poppy seeds, millet, or sand were scattered to distract the vampire. As they were compelled to count every grain, sickles or scythes were placed over the neck, positioned to decapitate the corpse if it attempted to rise. Pebbles or coins were placed under the tongue. In Christianized traditions, wax crosses or pottery inscribed with religious phrases were used to prevent vampiric transformation.
Outward protective measures for the living were also crucial.
Garlic was widely believed to ward off vampires. Holy symbols, including crucifixes, holy water, and Eucharistic wafers, were considered effective protective devices given the association of vampires with the devil. Running water was thought to repel or weaken vampires. The invitation rule dictated that vampires could not enter a home without an explicit invitation from someone inside. Scattering seeds or grains was a common tactic to distract a pursuing vampire, compelling them to stop and count the scattered objects, allowing potential victims to escape. Other protective items included thorn branches, iron, silver, mirrors, brooms, and shoes. Exorcism rituals were performed to expel the malevolent spirits animating the corpse. For excommunicated individuals believed to be vampires, absolution by priests was thought to cause them to turn to dust. Comparison with funerary rites. highlighting the intensity and deviation from normal burial. Customs as a reflection of heightened fear, normal funerary rites across ancient cultures focused on respectful preparation of the deceased. Solemn processions and symbolic offerings. These practices aim to ensure a peaceful transition for the soul and to preserve the memory of the departed. The overarching goal was to honor the deceased and facilitate their journey to the afterlife, providing closure and continuity for the living. These were not rites of passage designed to aid a soul's journey, but rather acts of violence against an ongoing, active, and malevolent threat. The extreme violence and desecration inherent in anti-vampire ritual staking, burning, decapitation, reveal a level of fear far transcending that of natural death. Normal death rituals aim to preserve dignity and facilitate a peaceful transition. The measures against vampires, however, were about absolute annihilation of an entity that defied death itself, demonstrating a profound terror of something that could not be contained by conventional means. This desperation underscores the belief that vampirism was a fate worse than death, demanding extraordinary, horrifying interventions that broke all societal norms regarding the treatment of the dead. Conclusion: the enduring legacy of ancient fears. The analysis presented herein firmly establishes that the unique threats posed by ancient vampires, specifically their role as agents of contagion, their capacity for spiritual damnation, and their inherent disruption of social and cosmic order, rendered them profoundly more terrifying than the natural cessation of life. Unlike conventional death, which, however bleak, offered a predictable framework and ritualized passage, vampirism represented an active, malevolent perversion of existence itself. This perversion manifested in grotesque physical forms, the corruption of the soul, the active spread of disease, and the shattering of familial and societal bonds, creating a multi-layered horror that defied containment and comprehension through traditional means. The evolution of vampire lore, from the grotesque ancient revenants to the romanticized figures of modern fiction, reflects a fascinating adaptation to changing societal anxieties. As scientific understanding advanced and the literal fear of disease-spreading corpses waned, the vampire archetype adapted to embody new societal concerns. In Victorian times, for instance, vampires personified fears of immigration, sexual promiscuity, and moral decay. More recently, modern portrayals often depict vampires as beautiful, brooding figures, addressing contemporary desires for immortality, transcendence, and even romantic fulfillment, moving away from the pure horror of disease and spiritual corruption. Despite these shifts in portrayal, the core themes of forbidden desire, control, and the blurring of life and death continue to resonate, demonstrating the enduring power of these ancient fears in the collective human psyche. The historical accounts of vampire panics, such as those in 18th century Eastern Europe or 19th century New England, serve as stark reminders of how fear, when coupled with a lack of scientific understanding, can lead to extreme societal reactions, including exhumations, desecrations, and the scapegoating of the other. The persistence of the vampire myth, even as its characteristics evolve, demonstrates that the underlying human fears it addresses are fundamental and adaptive. The mechanism of projecting anxieties onto a monstrous other remains a constant, even if the specific other changes with the times. The ancient fear of vampirism was so potent because it was a uniquely powerful and enduring symbol, encompassing not just physical demise, but spiritual corruption and widespread social destruction. This profound, multifaceted threat ensured that ancient vampires were indeed feared more than death itself.